Millions of people know Pontius Pilate as the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus to death. His name has echoed through history for nearly 2,000 years, remembered in sermons, paintings, and ancient creeds. But what happened after the crowd disappeared, after the cross stood empty, and after the Roman soldiers returned to their posts? Hidden between biblical accounts, ancient historians, and early Christian traditions lies a story surrounded by mystery, political intrigue, and unanswered questions. And one particular detail has led historians to debate his fate for centuries. What really happened to the man who washed his hands before condemning Jesus? By the end of this journey, you will discover who Pontius Pilate truly was before meeting Jesus, why Rome trusted him with one of its most volatile provinces, what happened immediately after the crucifixion, why his career suddenly collapsed, and the different historical traditions that attempt to explain his final days. More importantly, you will see how one decision transformed his name into one of the most recognized in human history. But what happened next is even more fascinating than most people realize. The story begins long before the trial of Jesus. Pontius Pilate was appointed governor of Judea around AD 26 during the reign of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. Judea was one of the most politically unstable regions in the empire. Religious tensions were constant, nationalist movements were growing, and any sign of rebellion had to be crushed quickly. Rome expected governors to maintain order at all costs, and Pilate's primary responsibility was not justice, but stability. Ancient Jewish historians, especially Josephus and Philo of Alexandria, described Pilate as a firm and often ruthless administrator. Several incidents before the ministry of Jesus had already damaged his reputation among the Jewish population. He introduced Roman standards bearing imperial images into Jerusalem, provoking outrage because many Jews viewed them as idolatrous. He later used money from the temple treasury to finance an aqueduct, sparking violent protests that ended with Roman soldiers attacking civilians disguised among the crowds. These events created an atmosphere of deep mistrust between Pilate and the religious leaders. Every Passover festival increased the danger of revolt because Jerusalem filled with pilgrims from across the region. Roman authorities reinforced military presence during these celebrations, knowing that even a single disturbance could escalate into rebellion. But this was only the beginning. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, enormous crowds welcomed him with expectations that varied dramatically. Some believed he was the promised Messiah. Others feared he might provoke Roman retaliation. The chief priests became increasingly concerned that his growing influence could threaten both their religious authority and the fragile peace maintained with Rome. According to the Gospels, Jesus was arrested during the night and brought before the Jewish authorities. Since they lacked authority to carry out capital punishment under Roman rule in most circumstances, they presented Jesus to Pilate with political accusations rather than purely religious ones. They claimed he declared himself king, a title Rome would interpret as direct opposition to Caesar. Pilate questioned Jesus personally. The Gospel accounts present an unusual exchange. Rather than finding evidence of political rebellion, Pilate appeared uncertain. Several times he declared that he found no basis for execution. Yet outside, the crowd continued demanding crucifixion, while influential leaders intensified the pressure. However, there is a detail that almost no one notices. The Gospel of Matthew records that Pilate's wife sent him a message during the trial, warning him not to condemn Jesus because she had suffered greatly in a dream concerning him. This brief statement has inspired centuries of speculation. While Scripture gives no further details, it adds another layer of tension to an already impossible decision. Pilate attempted several solutions. According to the Gospels, he sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, hoping another ruler would decide the matter. He offered to release him according to the Passover custom. He ordered Jesus to be scourged, perhaps believing the punishment would satisfy the crowd without requiring execution. None of these efforts succeeded. the pressure only intensified. Then came one of history's most symbolic gestures. Pilate publicly washed his hands before the crowd, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood. Yet despite that declaration, he authorized the crucifixion. Legally, the execution required Roman approval. The order ultimately carried his authority. From a political perspective, Pilate may have believed he was preventing a riot. From a historical perspective, his decision became one of the most consequential judgments ever recorded. But the most astonishing part was still ahead. Following the crucifixion, the Gospel accounts describe reports of the empty tomb and claims of Jesus' resurrection, spreading rapidly throughout Jerusalem. The religious authorities allegedly attempted to suppress these reports by persuading soldiers to say that the disciples had stolen the body while they slept. Whether or not Pilate believed these rumors remains unknown, but he certainly would have been informed of the growing movement centered on Jesus. Meanwhile, Christianity did not disappear after the crucifixion as many expected. Instead, it expanded. The disciples who had once hidden in fear began publicly proclaiming that Jesus had risen from the dead. Thousands embraced their message. What Rome may have viewed as the end of a troublesome preacher became the beginning of a movement that would eventually spread across the empire. Pilate himself continued governing Judea for several more years, yet unrest never completely subsided. Around AD 36, another confrontation dramatically changed his future. A Samaritan religious movement gathered at Mount Gerizim after a leader promised to reveal sacred artifacts supposedly hidden by Moses. Viewing the gathering as a potential rebellion, Pilate ordered military intervention. Many were killed and others captured. The Samaritan leaders appealed to Vitellius, the governor of Syria, accusing Pilate of unnecessary brutality. Vitellius investigated the complaints and ordered Pilate to travel to Rome and answer before Emperor Tiberius. For the first time, Pilate's own position stood in jeopardy. And then, something completely unexpected happened. Before Pilate reached Rome, Emperor Tiberius died in AD 37. The political landscape changed instantly. Instead of defending himself before the emperor who had appointed him, Pilate entered an uncertain future under a new ruler. Historical records become surprisingly quiet after this point, creating one of history's enduring mysteries. The earliest surviving historian to discuss Pilate's later years is Eusebius, writing centuries afterward. He reports a tradition that Pilate eventually fell into disgrace during the reign of Emperor Caligula and committed suicide. However, earlier contemporary historians do not explicitly confirm this account, leaving modern scholars cautious about accepting it as established fact. Other traditions developed in different parts of the ancient world. Some Christian writings portray Pilate as deeply troubled by his decision regarding Jesus. Certain Eastern traditions even describe his wife as eventually becoming a follower of Christ. In parts of the Eastern Christian tradition, Claudia Procula, the woman associated with Pilate's dream, is honored as a saint because of her warning concerning Jesus. Even more remarkable are traditions from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where Pilate himself has sometimes been viewed with unexpected sympathy, emphasizing his reluctance during the trial. These traditions differ significantly from Western interpretations and demonstrate how historical memory evolved across cultures over many centuries. Historians distinguish carefully between the biblical narrative, contemporary historical sources, and later traditions. The Gospels focus primarily on the theological significance of Jesus' death, rather than documenting Pilate's complete biography. Josephus and Philo provide valuable historical context about his administration. Later Christian writers preserve traditions that cannot always be independently verified, but reveal how early believers interpreted his legacy. One fascinating question remains: did Pilate ever regret his decision? History cannot answer with certainty. No authentic personal writings from Pilate survive. No official Roman confession has been discovered. The silence surrounding his final thoughts has only intensified the mystery throughout the centuries. Ironically, Pilate achieved a form of immortality unlike almost any other Roman governor. Countless provincial administrators governed distant territories, yet their names disappeared into history. Pilate's name, however, continues to be spoken around the world because it became permanently connected to the trial of Jesus. Every generation that studies the Passion encounters the Roman official who faced one of history's greatest moral decisions. His story also illustrates the immense pressure faced by political leaders, balancing justice, public opinion, and personal survival. Whether motivated by fear of unrest, concern for his career, or simple political calculation, Pilate chose expedience over conviction. That decision echoes across history, far beyond the borders of ancient Judea. Perhaps this explains why the account continues to captivate millions today. It is not merely the story of a Roman governor. It is the story of how a single choice, made under extraordinary pressure, can define an entire legacy. While empires rise and fall, while rulers are forgotten, one courtroom decision continues shaping conversations about justice, responsibility, courage, and truth. So what really happened to Pontius Pilate? The historical evidence tells us that he governed Judea, ordered the crucifixion of Jesus, faced political accusations after suppressing a Samaritan gathering, and was recalled to Rome. Beyond those facts, history enters the realm of competing traditions and unanswered questions. Yet perhaps the greatest mystery is not how his life ended, but how history continues to remember him. Do these events belong only to the distant past, or do they still challenge the choices people make today? If you had stood in Pilate's position, facing political pressure, public outrage, and uncertainty, what decision would you have made? Was he a ruthless governor, a reluctant judge, or a tragic figure caught between power and conscience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story captured your attention, be sure to like this video, share it with others who enjoy biblical history and ancient mysteries, and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth explorations of Scripture, historical discoveries, and the remarkable stories that continue to shape our understanding of the Bible.